Tonight, new worries about a virus and the warning to the world. The deadly new strain sweeping through Africa.
A public health emergency of international concern.
And the risk of a global spread. Urgent calls for help. A wildfire in Saskatchewan forces a First Nation to flee.
See that fire? Look at it, flared up big time.
Tracking Hurricane Ernesto's perilous path on the U.S. East Coast.
This can be a big storm with significant life-threatening impacts.
Reining in the high cost of dying during a cost of living crisis. Plus, tackling head injuries, the new gear to protect players.
It takes the initial pop out of the hits.
And on Puffling patrol.
And then they get stuck on land and cannot get out by themselves.
The rally to rescue beloved baby seabirds who have lost their bearings.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. There are new warnings tonight about the rapid spread of a virus in Africa the World Health Organization now says could spill across international borders. A previous public health emergency 2 years ago was caused by a milder strain of the Mpox virus, formerly known as monkeypox. But a mutation last September has created a new, deadlier variant. The WHO says there have been more than 14,000 cases and 524 deaths in Africa this year, already exceeding last year's figures. CTV's Heather Wright on who's most at risk, the symptoms, and the Canadian impact.
Mpox cases in Africa have surged 160% this year, a spike that has prompted the World Health Organization to declare a global health emergency.
It's clear that a coordinated international response is essential to stop these outbreaks and save lives.
Officials say a new variant of the virus appears to spread more easily than the one that prompted a similar warning from the WHO in 2022. What started as an outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has now spread to more than a dozen neighboring countries. In Canada, Mpox cases have also increased, though to a much smaller degree. Toronto Public Health says as of July 31st, there have been 93 reported cases, up from 21 this time last year.
In 2022, the epicenter was largely in Montreal. Now it seems to be in Toronto.
The virus is transmitted through close physical contact, causing flu-like symptoms and pus-filled lesions on the body. Cases are uncomfortable but often mild, though more than 500 deaths have been reported this year in Africa. Experts say those most at risk here in Canada are men who have sex with other men and sex workers.
I think that has led to the misconception by some people that it's a sexually transmitted infection, which is not true. It does appear to spread regardless of the contact. It's just that by chance, to a certain degree, it seems to have embedded itself within this community.
Members of that community are encouraged to get vaccinated, while experts also urge governments around the world, including Canada, to share its vaccines.
I know there's logistical hurdles and regulatory hurdles, but it's been 2 years, and there's still very limited access to these products in areas that are hardest hit.
Health Canada says it has a sufficient supply of Mpox vaccines, and a potential donation is one thing the government is considering, though they add at this point no formal request has been made. Heather Wright, CTV News, Toronto.
A First Nations community in Saskatchewan, home to about 1,800 people, has been evacuated due to an intensifying wildfire threatening the area. And there's also escalating frustration towards the province for not mobilizing hundreds of firefighters sooner. Here's CTV's Alison Bamford.
See that fire? Look at it, flared up big time.
As flames close in, frustration grows. Leaders of this remote First Nations village say the wildfire should have never reached this point if the province allowed more community firefighters to help earlier on.
Once a forest fire gets going and it gets to a size that's huge, then there's no managing that fire.
Saskatchewan's Public Safety Agency says hundreds of First Nations members are helping with province-wide efforts, including the Flanagan wildfire, burning since early July, that now spans 13,000 hectares, just 7 kilometers outside the village of Sandy Bay in northeast Saskatchewan near the Manitoba border.
So there's a lot of fire line that is very conducive to spreading. And with the winds from the west, northwest, it would push the fire towards the community.
First Nations leaders announced a phased approach to get everyone out safely, starting with elders, those chronically ill, children, and expecting mothers. Once they're safe, the general public will go. Hundreds already left by bus.
Many may choose to stay. We can't force those individuals out, but we can offer them the opportunity to leave.
In Alberta, many are preparing to return home to Jasper Friday, seeing the devastation in person for the first time. Officials say only residents will be able to re-enter the tourist town, warning it may be triggering.
You've probably seen many photos, and these photos will not prepare you for the smell and the sights when you get into town.
Efforts don't stop there. In BC, a month filled with lightning strikes led to more than 400 active wildfires burning across that province, with even more expected to spark in the coming days. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
The burning tree that killed a 19-year-old BC firefighter battling wildfires was flagged as dangerous before it fell. A workplace safety investigation revealed the danger was not addressed, along with multiple violations and missteps by the BC Wildfire Service.
And I want to be very clear here. We do not believe that it'd be proper to lay blame on individuals in this particular incident. We don't think this is an individual problem. We think that there is a systemic problem at work here.
Last year, Devon Gale died after a burning cedar fell on her. She was battling flames near Revelstoke, about 150 kilometers east of Kamloops. 2 other firefighters were injured trying to free her. The impact of wildfires creeping closer to Athens became more clear today. Officials saying an area almost twice the size of Manhattan has been destroyed. Nearly 700 firefighters have been battling the flames, which have forced thousands to flee and killed 1 woman. Hot temperatures, high winds, and highly flammable pine trees are fueling the fires. Closer to this side of the world, the worry is a hurricane. The U.S. East Coast is bracing for the wrath of Ernesto, which has already pummeled Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Flood watches and warnings have been issued as the system gains steam and tracks north. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbin reports.
From a tropical storm to a hurricane, Ernesto has brought more pain to Puerto Rico, pounding the island with torrential rain and wind. Floodwater raging over highways, cars swept away, half the island on this U.S. territory now without power. 23 hospitals operating on generators as officials warn the danger isn't over yet.
Stay away from the coastal areas, stay safe at home or wherever you are staying in the case of tourists, and keep an eye on the reports of the National Weather Bureau because, as I said, we're still under a watch for a tropical storm.
Schools and government offices closed, about 100 flights canceled to and from the island, from downed power poles, debris and fallen tree branches. Many here still remember the impact of Hurricane Maria 7 years ago. The island's power grid was decimated. After first slamming the Caribbean islands, unmooring this cargo ship in St. Martin,
the bad news is that we are in the northeastern quadrant of the storm, so we are expecting that we will see the wind.
Ernesto is expected to gain strength in the warm Atlantic water, threatening Bermuda as a more powerful hurricane on Saturday. Forecasters warning of riptides and strong wind along America's east coast before the storm tracks north to Canada.
But we want to raise the alarm bells here across Atlantic Canada. This can be a big storm with significant life-threatening impacts into early next week, and certainly the risk for widespread power outages.
U.S. President Joe Biden approved an emergency declaration for Puerto Rico, making disaster assistance available to the island in what has already been an early and intense hurricane season. Omar?
All right, Joy, thanks. There is a strong sign inflation is loosening its grip on the U.S. economy, dropping below 3% for the first time since March 2021.
Has the U.S. beat inflation, Mr. President?
Yes. I told you we're going to have a soft landing. We're going to have a soft landing.
Cooling inflation now sits at 2.9%, opening the door for the U.S. Federal Reserve to cut interest rates.
We don't see us going into a recession right now, and we do see the Fed starting to lower rates.
in September.
And that could give the Bank of Canada a reason to lower its rate again when it makes its next rate decision on September 4th. The United States is trying to dial down tensions in the Middle East, saying a ceasefire is still possible and that talks are expected to go ahead as planned tomorrow in Doha. Hamas representatives are insisting they won't attend, but say they may meet with mediators afterwards. Israel says it is sending a team to the talks. Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. are helping to broker a ceasefire hostage release deal. The last-ditch effort to revive stalled negotiations comes as the Middle East braces for a retaliatory attack by Iran on Israel. To another major conflict now, and to what some are calling a potential turning point. Ukraine says its forces have gained even more ground in Russia. 74 Russian towns and cities, representing about 1,000 square kilometers, an amount almost equal to what Russia captured from Ukraine since January. CTV's Michael Couture on the surprise incursion and Russia's response.
A burning vehicle sits as a symbol of Ukraine's cross-border offensive into Russian territory. This incursion is part of the largest attack on Russia since the Second World War. New video shows Ukrainian troops firmly in control of a Russian village 2 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. While in Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky is celebrating the advances and calling for more help. In his nightly address on social media, Zelensky asked allies to allow long-range strikes on targets inside Russia. That used to be a red line for allies in the West, worried it could trigger a response from Russia.
So the Ukrainians are demonstrating with facts on the ground that the Russian rhetoric up to now threatening nuclear retaliation and the beginning of the Third World War has all been a bluff.
As Russia's defense ministry released video of fighter jets reportedly over the Kursk region, Lithuania's defense minister claims Russia is moving troops from Kaliningrad to Kursk. It's a sign the Kremlin is scrambling after this shocking incursion by Ukraine.
Which puts a lot of pressure back on Putin to control the message inside, draw some of forces away from the east that are attacking the Ukrainians. But most of all is to show the West that, Ukraine still has a punch.
Russia is vowing to punch back. One lawmaker is calling the incursion terrorism and warning that the Kremlin will respond.
Well, when I studied in the United States, the main rule was don't poke the bear. What the West is doing today, they are poking the bear.
Ukrainian officials say a ballistic missile struck port infrastructure in Odessa. But the scope of the damage is unclear. Omar.
All right, Michael Couture in Ottawa, where former Conservative Cabinet Minister Chuck Strahl, who has died at the age of 67, served for nearly 2 decades. His family says he died yesterday after a courageous battle with lung cancer. The longtime Chilliwack BC MP was open about his health issues, which he attributed to his career in the logging industry. Strahl served as Minister of Agriculture, Transport, and Indian and Northern Affairs under former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre called Strahl a man of principle, integrity, and compassion. Grieving family members already struggling with the cost of living are now having to confront the cost of dying. And pricing pressures are also changing consumer habits, forcing funeral homes to adapt. CTV's Sarah Plowman has the story.
In its 6 decades, Bishop's Funeral Home has experienced a lot of change. The latest, more people are choosing cremation over burial and prepaying for funerals. The cost of living changing how people deal with dying.
So they don't have to worry about, or their children don't have to worry about, trying to fund a funeral at the time when they pass.
Prepaying for funerals has become especially popular over the past 4 years here. It can be paid for all at once or in installments. The contract is locked in.
Whether the price goes up in 5, 10, 15 years or not, that package that you prearranged is guaranteed.
Across Canada, funeral homes are doing a lot more than they once did.
We're releasing doves and blowing up balloons and making cupcakes and live streaming.
The majority of Canadians are now choosing cremation. It typically costs less than a service with a casket, but even that might be too expensive for some. In Newfoundland, unclaimed bodies piled up at a hospital and led the province to up the subsidies for families who can't cover funerals. Here, the cost to run the operation went up nearly 20%, as the cost of energy and salaries did, and that trickles down.
But ultimately, we try and guide them a bit and say, okay, well, if this is what Dad wanted, you know, these are the bare minimum things we'll need to do, but these are the choices that you may choose to do or not to do.
According to Canadian Funerals Online, a digital resource connecting people with funeral services, the average cost of a cremation funeral in this country is between $5,000 and $12,000. Of course, it could go up, depending on what you ask for. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
Coming up, playing it safe.
I could definitely see the pads being an everyday thing.
The new headgear hoping to intercept concussions, plus a ride-along with the Puffling Patrol on the Rock. The Toronto Maple Leafs have named star forward Austin Matthews as their new captain.
It just means the world to me, and I look forward to continuing our journey to obviously get to the top of the mountain and win the Stanley Cup and bring it back to Toronto.
Matthews takes over for John Tavares, who wore the C for the past 5 seasons. Matthews led the league in goals scored last year and resumes the hunt for the team's first Stanley Cup since 1967. There's a new tool in the fight against head injuries in professional football. Called Guardian Caps, the oversized protective headgear is getting more popular thanks to some high-profile players. And as CTV's Paul Hollingsworth tells us, doctors are cheering them on.
Guardian caps are bulky, heavily padded, and designed to minimize the impact of dangerous head contact that can cause concussions and other serious injuries.
They're a little bit heavier than our normal helmets, but I don't mind them. You get used to it after a couple of days, and it takes the initial pop out of the hits.
This neurosurgeon says Guardian caps signal a shift towards stricter player safety standards.
And the technology with the soft outer shell and the hard inner core is, from a physics perspective, makes sense. And the NFL has reported that there's a reduction in concussions.
Protective coverings for helmets are now being worn by football players at all levels across North America.
I think everybody's aligned to make the sport safer, including the players, the owners, the administrators.
Players in the CFL and NFL have a green light to wear Guardian caps in games, but up until now, for the most part, they've only been worn during training camps and practices. Catch made, Mo. 5 Indianapolis Colts players wore Guardian caps in a recent NFL preseason game. TSN's Dave Naylor expects that trend to grow in the future.
If you're going to see a trickle-down effect to other levels of football, I think it would logically start at the NFL level.
University football player Isaiah Okoli is open to the notion of wearing his Guardian cap in future games.
With the way the world's moving and everything that's going on, I could definitely see the pads being an everyday thing.
Okoli says Guardian caps are strange looking at first glance, but if they reduce his chances of getting a concussion, he's happy to wear one. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
Still ahead. A surprise performance at a wedding in St. John's.
I adore you, 'cause you don't care where I came from. Just kiss me in the dark.
Concern is growing over a possible strike or lockout at the country's 2 main railways. Canadian National Railway and Canadian Pacific Kansas City have started blocking shipments.
We're very concerned about our trade relationships with other countries, and that has a very detrimental impact.
The companies say they will lock out more than 9,000 employees next Wednesday if a deal cannot be reached. Negotiations have stalled over scheduling and wages. NASA has pushed back the deadline again to decide when to bring 2 American astronauts home. Sunita Williams and Barry Wilmore's 8-day mission to the International Space Station has lasted for more than 2 months, thanks to the tech-troubled Boeing Starliner. If those troubles persist, they won't be able to hitch a ride until February with SpaceX. Meantime, NASA has revealed stunning time-lapse video of the Aurora Borealis from the International Space Station, also known as the Northern Lights. A couple from Newfoundland and Labrador who couldn't make it to a performance of one of their favorite bands got the surprise of a lifetime at their wedding in St. John's. Max Kerman of the Arkells made a guest appearance after Noah and Stephanie Brace tied the knot, playing their first dance.
'Cause you don't care where I came from, just kiss me in the dark.
A friend of the bride sent him a message to make the magic happen, and as luck would have it, the band was staying at the same hotel. What a special moment, and congrats to the couple. After the break, the all-out rescue mission to save wandering baby puffins. Every summer, tens of thousands of puffins lay their eggs in Newfoundland. When chicks hatch, they head to the sea, or at least try to. Some get thrown off course by city lights and need to be rescued. CTV's Garrett Barry went on puffin patrol to watch how volunteers save the seabirds.
These babies are getting a new lease on life. Last night, they were found wandering, drawn to the bright lights of our streets and buildings.
If it's foggy or overcast, they can't see the natural light, and then they see the lights on land as the brightest light source, and the instinct still tells them go to the light, and then they get stuck on land and cannot get out by themselves.
But thanks to the so-called puffin patrol scouting the roads here every night all summer, they were scooped up and brought aboard this boat to be released away from predators like gulls directly on the water.
We usually equip them with nets, a box, strap to go over the box, and any equipment that they really need to actually find and handle the puffin.
Most of the rescuees were led astray on their very first flight. Their natural instincts are to follow the light of the moon out into the ocean, but bright city lights distract them and lead them astray. Before they take flight again, they'll be tagged, a bit of a tracking system.
So we've found at least 3 of them at this point. So it confirms that, you know, what we're doing and or what the volunteers are doing, what CPAWS is doing, and you know, putting all this effort into finding the birds and releasing them back into the environment does give them a second chance.
Finding 3 is impressive and hopeful because puffins come here, this island offshore, to mate in the hundreds of thousands.
So the likelihood of finding a banded puffin on one of those islands like a needle in a haystack.
They live the rest of their lives on the water, but at least a few have returned with the help of the Puffin Patrol. Garrett Barry, CTV News in Mobile, Newfoundland and Labrador.
And that's a snapshot of this Wednesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.